October 2020, we made history at the Southmorton Boxing Club by staging the world's first behind-closed-doors white-collar boxing show. We got over 10,000 views on the night across 103 countries. Now we're bringing the live rumble back, bigger and better than before. Follow the fighters in the build-up and vote on the night for your favourites. See all the thrills, spills and skills from the best in white-collar boxing, live and free at the KO Cup. Okay, Peter, so today I just wanted to talk about, the ramifications, the fallout from the fight of the weekend, the Smith-Canelo fight. As you remember, I predicted a Canelo stoppage about round 9 or 10. Obviously, it didn't quite play out like that. It looked like in the 9th round, Joe Gallagher, after a fairly torrid 9th round for Smith, Joe Gallagher sat Smith down and said, "You've got one more round." But Smith, very proud man, very tough man. He saw the fight through, and at the end of those 12 rounds, obviously Canelo was a huge winner. I had it 11 rounds to 1. I think you could make an argument that Smith won 2 rounds. You could also make an argument that Canelo won all 12. It was a masterclass. It was a domination. And the interesting thing is, coming into this fight, a lot of us, people that were making the argument for Smith were justifiably saying, "Have you seen the size of this guy? He's got an 8-inch reach advantage on his jab. He's so much taller. He's huge at the weight. He's 6'3". He's strong. Tony Bellew was saying he's going to bully Canelo like Canelo's never been bullied because he's so strong." But, none of it came to pass. The miraculous thing was, Canelo just looked so strong in there. He looked absolutely bull strong. He marched forward. He didn't look like he was bothered by Smith's punches. And the amazing thing for me was he managed to out-jab Smith. How do you out-jab a man who has an 8-inch reach advantage on you? He just closed the space so well. He was, he was jabbing with Smith. He was connecting, and you wouldn't have thought that Smith had an 8-inch reach advantage. And it's been a strange thing, Peter. It was just making me think these fights at the end of the year have been dominated by the jab, because obviously, we were just talking the other week about how Joe Joyce managed to beat Daniel Dubois using his jab. Arthurs overcame Yard. The unfancied Arthurs using his jab. Errol Spence against Daniel Garcia. The story of that was Errol Spence's southpaw jab, which is what led to that victory against Garcia. So I'm a massive fan of the jab, and it's been the story of the jabs in these last few fights to close out the year. And that was obviously only part of the story. Canelo's amazing head movement, his judgment, his timing, his upper body movement. Defensively, he was brilliant. He looked incredibly strong. He cut the distance with Smith. Didn't let Smith use any of his advantages. And again, we talked about it because we know this. We know what you need to do with Canelo when you're Smith is you want to keep it at range, you want to box. We thought at least the first few rounds, Smith will be able to keep him at range and use those long levers. But it just none of it came to pass. And it's amazing. Smith is strong. He does have a fantastic jab. We've seen that time and time again. But against Canelo, Canelo just stripped all those assets away. He just takes all that away from you. He does his thing brilliantly, and he stops you doing your thing. And obviously, this fight then makes him a legitimate 4-weight world champion. He went after Smith because he had the Ring Magazine belt and he had the WBA belt, and it also added the WBC belt into the mix. Obviously, a few people argued when he beat Rocky Fielding at super middle for the interim WBA strap, that's not a proper world title. But now he's got that. He's legitimately, a 4-weight world champion. That amazing resume, and it's hard to believe this guy is only 30. And this Christmas, Peter, he sits atop the pound-for-pound tree after that, and there's nobody nipping at his heels. We used to argue about Lomachenko. Now that's over. Obviously, Lopez is in his place, but needs to prove himself. There is no one else up there. He is undoubtedly, after that superb performance, that amazing dismantling of Smith, the unassailed pound-for-pound king. So the question is, where does he go from here, I suppose? Interesting enough, I mentioned Errol Spence's great win against Danny Garcia, another win that rounded out the year. And Spence was in attendance, and Spence is being talked about as a potential future opponent. Now, where they would have that fight, in terms of weight, I don't know. At the post-fight press conference, Canelo was asked, "Are you now going to go to cruiserweight?" And he just said, no, that's too far. So at least there are some limits, although there was footage of him sparring with heavyweights in preparation for this fight, mainly, I think, because Smith is 6'3". It's very difficult to find 6'3" in super middleweights. So he was sparring with heavyweights. But, how far does he go? How strong does he stay? But at least he seemed to put some sort of level on his ambitions there. Physically, the frame and everything just can't take it. So he said, no, I'm not going to cruiserweight. 160, 168 is where I'm strongest, is where I'm best. And he specifically said, my next intention is to unify this title. Now that puts Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders in the frame. You know, if he's going to mop up the other two belts out there, it's Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders. Like I say, Spencer's a possible future thing. Obviously, Triple G is out there, looked very good last time out, and maybe that's a bit of unfinished business. But even though Canelo's got those 2 victories, you know, there's a little bit of a controversy about the first one. Maybe you want to put that to bed. And I know DAZN are very keen on that fight, that trilogy with Triple G. So that is looking very alive now. But in terms of his next steps, another thing at the press conference was he really praised up Eddie Hearn. Couldn't praise Eddie high enough. You know, said the ring walk was amazing. You know, so Eddie's doing everything right now. Canelo is a free agent. He chooses who he wants to fight for his next fight, and he chooses where he does it and what promoter he works with. But let's just say, you know, it's looking pretty rosy for Eddie. And that means it's looking pretty rosy for Billy Joe Saunders, because obviously, you know, he's marketed by Eddie as well. So that would be an easy fit for, you know, Canelo to fight Billy Joe Saunders and look at annexing that WBO title as well. The Caleb Plant fight is a great fight. The only thing against Billy Joe is that maybe he hasn't got the profile in the States that, for example, Caleb Plant has. You know, he's been fairly low profile. I mean, really, you know, with things with Billy Joe, he's been fairly inactive. Since that amazing win against Lemo, you know, 3 years ago, when he all made us sit up and take notice, you know, he's kind of rolled along one fight a year, and they haven't been that sort of stimulating and exciting. So he's got that against him. But there is another Brit in the frame, interestingly enough, that's being talked about. Is Chris Eubank Jr., who has been raising his profile in the States, is managed by Al Heyman, you know, has had a few good wins. Everybody knows about him, trains with Roy Jones Jr. So, you know, and also Eubank sells fights. You know, that's one thing he is good at. Eubank sells fights. So, you know, I could well see, you know, Eubank Jr. coming along in the future and getting a fight with Canelo. But at the moment, I think, you know, the lead one you've got to look at is probably Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, because he said he wants to annex that. Triple G is also in the mix, but those are the guys that are out there. But, you know, a tremendous achievement by Canelo. Yeah, an amazing win. You know, he looks like he's entrenched with Eddie Hearn now. So Eddie is, you know, Matchroom USA has got the premier star. So they're doing well. You know, DAZN seem happy. So in a way, all the stuff that we talked about this year, you know, where was Canelo going to go? How long was he going to be on ice for? What were these lawyers going to do to his career? You know, it all looked a bit shaky earlier in the year, but he finishes the year very much on top. Very much the pound-for-pound king, very much the number one. It looks like he's going to clean up in the super middleweight division. You know, whether he'll drop to middle to fight Triple G again, we don't know. Whether he'll drop to fight Errol Spence, we don't know. But, you know, the future's rosy, and all we need to see is the crowds back. There were 12,000 people in that arena, and Canelo himself said it made it sound full, but it's a 75,000-seater arena. You know, I think we've got to look at the next massive Canelo event being the Cinco de Mayo, you know, where he loves to fight, and who's going to get that date. The pull of that, hopefully the crowds will be back. You know, even though Canelo in the press conference as well said he wants to go around the world, he talked about fighting in Japan, he talked about fighting in Europe, he talked about fighting in Africa. But I think the financial pull of Vegas for a Cinco de Mayo, as long as the crowds are back, then, you know, it's going to be unassailable. So I would, you know, if I was going to bet the next thing that's going to happen, you know, and it all does go, I would say because of Billy Joe Saunders up in the WBO, because of Canelo wanting to clean up in the super middleweight division, because of his blossoming relationship with Eddie Hearn, I think it's going to be Billy Joe Saunders, maybe Cinco de Mayo in Vegas. But, you know, lots of things can happen. There's lots of other names I've chucked into the hat there, and we'll just have to see how things develop. But like I say, put him at the top of your pound-for-pound Christmas tree. He's sitting there, and everybody else is well below him. Well done, Canelo, an absolute masterclass. And, you know, where does Smith go from here? You know, he did look very dejected. I mean, there is that injury to mention. You know, he's saying injury to his left bicep in probably the second or third. But, you know, Canelo said he had noticed it. And Smith, but, you know, nobody thinks it would have made any difference to the outcome of the fight. You know, it was just it was a fait accompli by the time that injury happened anyway. So yeah, but for Smith, I mean, maybe move up. You know, let's not forget. I mean, I know he's very dejected, but what he's achieved at super middleweight is amazing. You know, Ring Magazine, WBA belt, British, European, all that sort of thing. So maybe that big frame that we always talk about is just, you know, maybe it's a bit too much for him to make the weight now at super middle when it's time to go to light heavy, and he could become a multiple champion at light heavy. He did look very dejected, but, you know, he's a winner. He comes to win, and you know, unfortunately, Canelo was just those levels above, you know, with that experience. So and that strength. So yeah, but so no disgrace for Callum Smith, and I hope we see him back in the ring soon. But like I say, at the moment, the Christmas cracker is Canelo. Well done, and a great way to close out the year. Thanks, Peter.